Hi everyone. During this lesson, we will learn how to work with variables and also explore the data types that exist in the Python language. To begin with, let's find out what a variable is. A variable is essentially a memory cell where we can store some information, and then we can access this information. We can modify this information, delete it, display it on the screen, and perform any actions with it in general. To create a variable, we need to specify its name, and the name can be anything as long as we avoid using special characters. However, it's best to name variables meaningfully. For example, right now I want to create a variable where I'll be storing some number. Therefore, I'll name this variable number. As the value of this variable, I want to set the number 5. To assign a value to the variable, I need to write an equal sign after its name and then specify the actual value. Now we see that we have created a variable named number, and this variable holds the number 5. Later on, we will learn how to store not only integers but also floating point numbers, strings, and any other data types that exist in Python. Let's first understand how we can work with this variable. After creating it, the first thing that comes to mind is to display it on the screen. To do this, we use the print function and simply place our variable number inside this function. If you run this, you will see that our number will be printed to the console. Besides printing, you can also change the value of the variable. For example, I have set the value to 5 here, but shortly let's change the value of this variable to 7, and again write the function to print this variable. Now you will notice that initially our variable was printed with a value of 5, and then with a value of 7. Everything worked successfully, and there were no problems. In addition to storing integers, as we did just now, we can also store other types of values and variables. Let's create a variable named digit. Again, the name can be anything, but it's important not to use special characters. This time, I want to set not an integer but a floating point number to this variable. For example, I'll write 4.5, and this will be processed correctly. You can also write as many characters before and after the decimal point as you want. It will all be processed correctly. Besides that, we can also store strings and variables. Let's create another variable, and let it be named word. Here, I want to place a string. I can place the string in either single or double quotes. There won't be any difference. Let's write the word hello into it. Now we just need to output these variables. Let's add output for the digit and word variables in a similar way. After that, let's run the program and make sure that 2 new variables have been added to the output, where one contains a floating point number and the other contains a string. Additionally, let's create another variable with a Boolean data type. Let's name it Boolean, and remember that a variable with this data type can only store 2 values, true or false. In the following lessons, we will talk about this data type and where it can be used. And a few more words about data types. In the Python language, there is no strict typing. This means that when creating a variable, we don't need to specify what data type this variable will use. That is, depending on the value we assign to the variable, Python automatically determines its type. So, when we create an integer, Python understands that the data type of this variable is int. When there is a fractional part in the number, the data type is called float. When we create a string, we create the data type string. And when we create a Boolean variable, we create a variable based on the data type bool. It's also important to remember that you cannot add different data types together. You will encounter an error. For example, if you try to add a string to a number, you will get an error. And to handle this error, we will learn how to do it shortly. To fix the error with adding the variable word and the integer value of the variable number, we need to convert the variable number to a string data type. To do this, in the last line where we are trying to add them, before the variable number, we need to append a function called str. This function takes any number, whether it is an integer or not, and converts it to a string. If I run this, I will see that everything has been processed correctly and no errors are raised. Now, let's use the knowledge we've gained to create something interesting. I want to develop a program where I will receive two numbers from the user, and then we will output all possible mathematical operations related to these two numbers. Therefore, to obtain values from the user, I will use the input function, which we touched on in the previous lesson. Inside it, we will write a prompt for ourselves, like enter the first number. Let's copy this line to prompt the user for the second number as well. If I try to run the program now, we will see that I can enter the first number, and then the second number, and the program will end. Now we need to store the number we get from the user somewhere. We will store it in a specific variable. So, I can create a variable here, let's call it number 1, and as the value for this variable, I specify the first value obtained from the user. Similarly, I will do for the second variable. That is, I create another variable and assign it the second value obtained from the user. Below, we will output the results. For this, I will write an output function a bit below, where I will first add the first variable to the second variable. Also, a bit below, I will output the subtraction, division, and multiplication of numbers. If we run all of this now and enter any numbers, we will get an error. The error now is related to the fact that every time we get some value from the user, that value by default is a string. Therefore, when I try to, for example, divide one string by another, of course, we get an error because we cannot do that. So, we need to convert our strings into numbers. To do this, let's convert our values to integer data types right in the lines where we ask the user to input values. In this case, there won't be any errors, and if we run the program and enter numbers, we will get all the results. In addition, if you need to perform a mathematical operation with the same variable, there are several ways to do it. Suppose I want to add the number 5 to the first variable. This can be written in this format. This will work perfectly fine, but you can also use a more concise format. That is, here we simply specify plus, equals, and then add a certain number. Now, if we run the program, we will see that in the response, we didn't get the number 3, but first we added 5 to the first number, and only then did we perform the addition of the variables, which is 5 plus 3. Therefore, we got the correct result. In addition, you can also perform subtraction. This means that we subtract the number from our variable, which is on the right. You can also perform division, multiplication, and the remainder of division. That is, all mathematical operations that can be performed here. I also want to mention a point that I forgot to mention. It's that we can multiply not only numbers but also strings. For example, let's create a string that says hi. And then in the output, let's try to multiply this string immediately. It sounds illogical, but in the Python language, it's possible. If I try to multiply this string by 3 now, then in this case, we will get this string displayed on the screen 3 times. If we multiply it by 20, then accordingly, the value of this string will be displayed 20 times. And one more nuance related to data types. Here, when we create a specific variable in the Python language, a data type is immediately added to this variable. For example, here I placed a string, and to this variable word, the data type string is immediately added. At the same time, I can write here a new data type for this variable. This happens because when we set a new value for the variable, the old value is deleted, and then the creation of a new variable occurs. Well, our lesson is coming to an end. In this lesson, we have learned how to work with variables and even got a little practical experience with them. In future lessons, we will constantly work with variables, so if something was unclear now, don't worry, because you will encounter them many more times in subsequent lessons and will easily learn about them. That's all for now. If you enjoyed the lesson, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next lessons. Thank you all for watching. See you soon. Goodbye.